welcome back to the Xan Shoob podcast. We're your hosts here. We are going to be going through the ACC Coastal division today, and we're excited to do this division. The Coastal Chaos is the hashtag for what people peg this division as, especially in recent years. Almost every single one of these teams has won, I believe every single team in the Coastal division has won this division in the past decade, which is insane. But this will be the last year of Coastal Chaos, as the ACC is going to be changing their scheduling format starting next year. But for the final time in this era of college football, we will discuss the Coastal, and we're going to start with the Pitt Panthers. Pitt, their line here is sitting at 8.5 as their win total. And with Pitt, what really, of course, strikes you is the losses of Kenny Pickett and Jordan Addison. Kenny Pickett, of course, put up Heisman-like numbers last season. He put up bombs to Jordan Addison all year long, and Pitt was a very fun team to watch, at least offensively. But now moving forward here into 2022, when looking at this Pitt team, Kedon Slovis, their new transfer from USC, he will be the quarterback. And Pitt also is going to bring in a new offensive coordinator because they lost Mark Whipple to Nebraska. So Pitt will be bringing in the new OC, and it's Frank Cignetti. He has a lot of coordinator experience in his past, so we shall see how the new OC goes along here with Pitt. But I think all in all, as far as just offense, I think you can expect it to probably regress just a little bit. The thing with Kedon Slovis is, outside of his true freshman season where he looked like a prodigy in the making at USC, his numbers sort of declined his next two seasons over there in Los Angeles. And with Kedon Slovis, the big question here is how much of a notch below Pickett's production will he be this year for this Pitt team? I think that if we can expect any form of the true freshman Kedon Slovis, I think maybe Pitt will be in store for a good season. The other thing, though, that I really like about this Pitt team is that their offensive line should be really good. It was really good last year, and they returned all 5 of their starters up front who were top 20 in line yards. It'll be very safe to say, assuming good health all season, that Pitt will have an elite offensive line for Kedon Slovis to work through. And also, I think this will be beneficial for the running game. As far as the defense was 18th in efficiency last year. The defense was actually pretty good. In fact, the defense, despite what many people think, it was actually better than the offense in terms of efficiency. The D-line was 3rd in the whole country in line yards. They were 7th in sack rate. And a lot of those guys up front along the defensive line return. Pitt will be elite in the trenches, and that is something that is very rare to say about a team that does not recruit like Alabama, Georgia, Clemson. A team that has been able to develop the trenches this well, I think, can be in store for a very good season. So with that being said, it's going to hinge on those offensive skill position players. Which version of Kedon Slovis are we going to see? With the loss of Jordan Addison, how much less potent is this receiving core going to be? And if you look at Pitt's schedule, you look at the non-con, they kind of scheduled a little aggressively. They open up with West Virginia at home in the backyard brawl. Cannot wait for that one. That's a Thursday night in week 1. Love to see that rivalry renewed. I think they should be about a 7-point favorite over West Virginia. Then they got Tennessee at home. They beat Tennessee last year in Knoxville. They got them at home this year. Then they go at Western Michigan, who they lost to last year, believe it or not. And then they got Rhode Island. So I think it's fair to say, if you're a Pitt fan, reasonably probably 3-1 in that stretch. But it is possible if this team has a very good season again, they could go 4-0 in that stretch. But that's going to be tough. And then the thing about their ACC schedule, which is kind of a red flag for me, is that a lot of their tougher ACC conference games are on the road. They go at Louisville. They go at UNC. They go at Miami. It's going to be pretty tough for Pitt to replicate what it did last season. Now, don't get me wrong, the offensive and defensive lines is going to be a very, very good thing for this team. It's going to really hinge on Kedon Slovis and these skill position players. If you believe in Kedon Slovis and these skill position players, I think Pitt can be in store for another double-digit win season. But with the schedule and with the regression that we should expect offensively, I think 8 to 9 wins seems about right for me. I'm going to play the under for Pitt. I think 8 wins is probably just slightly more likely than 9, but this is really a coin flip for me. I wouldn't be surprised if Pitt hits this over, but my official play will be under.
You know, Shoob, you made a lot of good points. Another one that I would reiterate is Pitt's defense. very solid, especially in the trenches. Absolutely insane. One thing that's really interesting about the Pitt Panthers over here, they probably have the most or the greatest number of dudes with hard to pronounce names on their defense that are actually impactful. When
That's
you
usually
look
a
at
good thing, right?
that is usually a good thing. It usually means you're a pretty good player right off the bat, right? That's a law. It's like a law of physics. It's a law of football. But some of the players that I really want to point out are like Kalijah Cansey. He's considered one of their best players. Baldonado Habakkuk. I'm hoping I'm saying that right, but this is just kind of like to bring back what I was saying about how these guys have some really interesting names. They have a star linebacker in Servocia Dennis. I mean, and these are just some of the guys that I'm listing. There are other guys who are getting NFL hype on that defense. And so when you consider everything that they have on the defensive side of the ball, I think they are very stout on the first and second level. Now the secondary, that one's wishy-washy. They could still they could still have a pretty respectable secondary, but I will tell you their first two levels are going to be outstanding. They are going to have probably a pretty good rushing defense, and so it's going to be hard to move the ball against them. One thing that I really like about this Pitt team, despite losing all that production, they are bringing in another transfer at wide receiver to replace some of that production. He's from Akron, actually, and he's only going to be a true sophomore this year. His name's Kanata Mumpfield, and he had 750 yards and 8 touchdowns as a true freshman last year for Akron. They're hoping that he's going to come in and help increase their offensive production with the loss of all those big names that we just mentioned. They were number 8 in offensive yardage last year, which is outstanding for the Pitt Panthers and the Pitt faithful. That was more than a fun season for me as a college football fan to watch, and I can only imagine how it was for a Pitt fan. So, of course, we are, like you said, probably going to see some natural regression from this Pitt team, especially offensively. But I do think from a defensive standpoint, they're going to be right there. I think their offense is still going to be formidable enough to compete in this conference and potentially be in the conference championship game to edge out in the Coastal. I really like when I look at their schedule, Shoob. I look over here, I see wins against Rhode Island, Georgia Tech, Cuse, Duke, Western Michigan. That's like 5 wins to me that they're gonna get. Western Michigan, I feel like isn't one that's in the bag, but I think that they will win that one. And then possible like West Virginia, Virginia Tech, UVA, and then there's some question marks with UNC. UNC's got a lot of talent, but they're going to have a new quarterback. They've got some things going on over there. So there are definitely a few things here that I like about this Pitt team in regards to their matchups. I know you mentioned they have some unfavorable away games, but with that, and despite that, I think this team just has so much talent relative to who they play and who's in the Coastal Division with them. And for that reason, I'm going to take Pitt on the over. I actually do think that this team will get the over. I think they are primed for 8 to 9 wins, but I'm going to go with 9, and I think their ceiling is about 10. I could see about a double digits. But again, they are going to lose some production. And like you said, I think Keaton Slovis, he's going to have the best offensive line he's had in a long time. And it's just prime for him to perform well for his girlfriend who's on the soccer team, and probably the reason he went there to begin with. So let's go Pitt on the over. Keaton Slovis has a reason to play. He's got a girl in the crowd, man.
That's not a bad reason to transfer at all. And also, I mean, who wouldn't want to transfer to a place with that type of offensive line that he's going to be playing behind? It's definitely a popular destination, especially after what Pickett did last year. And one thing I forgot to mention, we also got to shout out the running game for Pitt. I think the running game will definitely take a step forward this year, especially with the O-line. And that's a really good job that Pat Narduzzi's done building the trenches for this Pitt team. It's something that you can really get an edge on. If you're elite in the trenches in college football and you don't recruit like Georgia or Alabama, I think you can be in store for a good season. Wouldn't be surprised if Pitt gets this over. So now moving down here to Miami. Miami, a big hot topic of the offseason. Miami, like Louisville, is very hot on the recruiting trail right now. Miami, their winning total is sitting at 8.5. They got a brand new coach. They got brand new coaching staff, a ton of brand new players in the portal. Miami's like a new shiny car right now. What do you got for the Canes?
So for the Canes, there's a lot to like about the Canes. When you look over, they finally have a bona fide, good NFL-type quarterback they haven't had in a long time in Tyler Van Dyke. He makes them a real contender out there in the Coastal. I can definitely see them as a conference championship contender this year. Not quite a college football playoff type team, but they're definitely a team that is a candidate to be a 10-win team this year. When you look over here and you see just how efficient Tyler Van Dyke was, with his 25 touchdowns to 6 interceptions, about 3,000 rushing yards, or sorry, passing yards. He's definitely a formidable player. And then, not to mention, when Tyler Van Dyke took over, Miami skyrocketed up to the 19th rated offense in offensive yardage. So that in itself is really impressive. Miami is a little weak on the defensive side of the ball, all things considered, being 75th in yards allowed. But I will say the addition of Mario Cristobal, it's a great hire for them. And given Miami's sources and with the new era of college football and how well they're recruiting, I think it's only a matter of time before Cristobal really turns Miami into a force over there. If they don't get it done this year, I certainly don't suspect it's going to take long for it to happen. But I do like Miami this year for that. I will say, as you were alluding to, they are killing it in recruiting. Not only that, but they're killing it in the transfer portal. They have brought in so many guys in the transfer portal. They've brought in 2 to 3 quality offensive linemen who are going to help bolster the protection for Tyler Van Dyke. They brought in some very good defensive linemen as well, the most notable being the West Virginia transfer, Akeem Mesidor. And he was an absolute stud for the Mountaineers, and that loss is going to be pretty big for them. And then, not to mention, the wide receiver transfer from Clemson, who was a former 5-star recruit, and Frank Ladson, who's expected to be a starter there. He comes home to Miami, where he's originally from, so we could see some improvement there. He had a little bit of a disappointing career over at Clemson. He only got to play a year, and he didn't play much. But people think that the athleticism is there, and he can be rejuvenated with Tyler Van Dyke, given that he's got a good quarterback now. Miami will be improved in the trenches for all those reasons. They've got talent. They've got transfer portal guys coming in. I can only see Miami getting better than they were last year. And when you analyze their schedule, Shoob, I see wins against Bethune-Cookman, obviously, free win. Southern Miss, Middle Tennessee State, Duke, G-Tech. Those are free wins to me. In my book, that's 5 free wins. I don't think they're going to get past Texas A&M. I think Texas A&M is going to handle them, but I don't suspect it's going to be a blowout by any stretch of the imagination. I think Texas A&M just has too good of a defense, and they've got some talent on the offensive side of the ball, as we were talking about in our previous podcast with Connor Weigman and just the QB battle that's going on over there and what may come out of it, Haynes King, everyone that's going on over there. But the possible games, UNC, VTech, FSU, UVA, Clemson, Pitt, and yes, I put Clemson as a possible win for them, because there's a lot of unknowns with Clemson. And if you want to know our rationale for the unknowns behind Clemson, check out our last video or check out our last breakdown of the other division, the Atlantic. I really like Miami to get at least 4 wins out of those potentials that I just mentioned, to at least get 4 wins out of that. And with that being said, Miami for at least 9 wins is what I'm thinking, 9 to 10 wins. And that's going to be the over, Shoob.
Nice. So an over for Miami. You mentioned Cristobal and all the transfers that he's brought in. He's also brought in 2 new hot coordinators, both offensively and defensively. As far as the offense, Josh Gaddis is the guy he poached from Michigan. Michigan had a great offense last year, as many have highlighted. I think the thing with Josh Gaddis is it's going to be a new system for Tyler Van Dyke to learn from. So I wouldn't be surprised, to be honest, if maybe Miami's offense doesn't quite live up to expectations, or maybe Van Dyke doesn't quite get it going immediately starting in the season. But the thing with Van Dyke, you mentioned his numbers last year. If you want to dive a little bit deep into his numbers, he was 11th in adjusted yards per attempt in all of college football, and he was 10th in passer rating. And that was just in 10 games he played last year. He only played in 10 games. He didn't play a full season. So safe to say Van Dyke is definitely a guy with big NFL upside. He's going to be throwing to a lot of young receivers. It will be a new system. And then defensively, you mentioned that the defense was a ton of question marks. They are going to be pretty young. They only returned 5 starters. 3 to 4 of those guys are going to be transfers. Lots of the secondary comes back, which I think is going to be good. The secondary should be improved. But as far as the schedule, man, I mean, of course, those 3 wins, Bethune-Cookman, Southern Miss, Middle Tennessee, should be W's. And then at Texas A&M, I'm actually very looking forward to this game. This is one of my favorite non-con games I'm going to be looking forward to watch early in the year. I'm not ruling out that they can go into College Station and beat A&M. That would be a heck of a statement if Miami was able to do that. But at this point in time, I'm not going to say that they will. So I'm going to say 3-1 probably in non-con. And then you said drawing Clemson. The fact that they draw Clemson in the crossover this year is a tough draw. But hey, it's a chance for Miami fans to see what type of team they get and compare themselves to one of the better teams in the conference and in the country. I am going to assume that 8 to 9 wins seems likely, but I am going to play the over on this team. I think 9 wins is slightly more likely than 8. And it's the same thing with Pitt. They're both 8.5. I see both Pitt and Miami as probably ending up with 8 to 9 wins. I'm just going to flip a coin basically and say, hey, I think Miami 51 out of 100 times is going to hit 9, and Pitt 51 out of 100 times is going to hit 8. So if this ends up being flipped, I wouldn't be shocked in the very least. All right, now moving down to UNC. UNC, the Tar Heels, they were arguably one of the most disappointing teams in all of college football last year. I think it's fair to say that, right? We were very high on this North Carolina team. We were very high on Sam Howell. If you watched our podcast back in 2020 when Sam Howell was a freshman, we loved him, and he didn't quite live up exactly to what we thought he was going to be. But there's going to be a lot of new faces, especially offensively for UNC this year. They did have high expectations, but maybe this is the year that they strike. Maybe this is the year that all those hopes about UNC and this talent comes through. Maybe we were just a little bit early on them, but there's going to be a QB battle between Jacoby Criswell and Drake May, who was a high 4-star recruit. Actually, May's a redshirt freshman, but I'm very interested to see how that QB battle plays out. I've heard a lot of great things about Drake May, and of course, Jacoby Criswell is a junior. He's a little bit older, has a slightly more experience. So I think obviously in the long term, there's more upside with May at quarterback, but I'm really interested to see how this QB battle plays out. I would kind of like to see Drake May play because I just kind of want to see what he's got, but it's good that they have depth at the quarterback position. The O-line was actually pretty good last year. However, they lost 2 guys to the draft, but all of their offensive linemen that they start this year are seniors or graduate transfers. So I think that's going to be good for UNC. They got a lot of experience up front. The defense, once again, a lot of these ACC teams, they had good offenses, but the defenses were poor. And North Carolina was one of those teams.
Is the ACC the new Big 12, Shoob?
It seems that way, low key, especially last year. But defense last year, 98th in efficiency, just avoiding being outside the top 100. They have a new defensive coordinator, Gene Chizik. Gene Chizik, a national champion winning coach, is one of Mac Brown's latest hires. And I think with a lot of the defense coming back and with Chizik at DC, I think the defense just has to be better by default. That's kind of my verdict on this defense. I think that there's a ton of upside with this defensive well, especially along the defensive line. The defensive line, they have 5-star talent along there. And those guys, honestly, if you look at it, they were really poor in line yards last year. Maybe this is the year that this defensive line can step up. And if this defensive line arrives, so to speak, in year 3, maybe this defense can take a massive step forward. And I mean, there's upside for this defense to take a massive step forward this season. So a ton of upside, even though it might not be very good this year if they don't improve much at all. As far as the schedule is going to be a little tricky. They play App State on the road week 2, which is going to be a little tricky. In fact, right now, I think UNC is only like a 3-point favorite. I would not be surprised at all if App State knocks them off and gets the upset in week 2, especially with a brand new quarterback playing week 2. And then they got to go at Georgia State, should be a win. They have a bye week before they play Notre Dame at home, which I think is sort of favorable for them, though Notre Dame's probably a better team at this point. So don't get me wrong, there's a ton of upside with this UNC team. We'll see how the quarterback play plays out. We'll see how the defensive line plays out. Those are the 2 areas that you really got to look for with that upside. It's a very high variance team. It's a team that I'm not touching as far as betting, but for the sake of this video, I'm going to say under, but I would not be surprised at all if maybe UNC eclipses this over and has a great season if all this talent arrives early. But I think that 6 wins is probably a minimum. 6 to 7 wins, that's what I'd say is more likely. But I do feel like 9 to 10 wins is a ceiling that this team can definitely get to if everything goes right.
You made a lot of good points, Shoob, about UNC. There's a lot to like about this team. They have a lot of talent. When you look at their past recruiting classes here in recent years, it just shows you how much talent is on this roster. They were 11th ranked in recruiting in 2022, 14th in 2021, and 16th in 2020. They have brought in 5-star recruits. One is starting at corner right now, Tony Grimes. And then they've got 2 guys on the defensive line who are 5-star guys. One was redshirted last year, but when all these guys come together and you have a new D coordinator who's a national champion winner, it's hard to believe that with all this talent that is accumulated on the defense at every level, if you just analyze North Carolina's recruiting classes, they have talent at every level. It's just a matter of can they put it together to create a defense that's going to make them formidable. And in addition to that, that QB battle that you mentioned, I don't think Criswell is going to win that battle. I think we're going to see the redshirt freshman take it. Maybe that's just me, but I feel like they've had Howell. They're going to run a similar system. Criswell, I feel like is not really a fit for that system. And then plus you've got a young, talented arm. Why not get his feet wet early? And if he has any growing pains, now's the time to get through him. UNC also returns Josh Downs, very talented, highly talented receiver who will be a first or second round pick in this upcoming draft. That's a huge get for their offense. UNC is just one of those teams, Shoob, lots of talent, but can they put the pieces together? I'm going to say they do. When they play this, and I'm going to take the over on UNC. The biggest thing that I really like about them is just this accumulation of talent. And really, it's just about putting the pieces together, like I said, and I've reiterated, so forth and so on. They bring in a couple guys, running back George Pettaway, Andre Green. Now, these are guys, and wide receiver Andre Green. These are guys who may not play right away, but they are so highly touted and highly respected among recruiting circles and the UNC faithful that we may very well see these guys get some playing time this year and be quite impactful. That's one thing about UNC, Shoob. They have so many guys who are so highly touted that have come in. It's hard to believe that none of these guys are just going to have their year where they absolutely show up and make a name for themselves. And for me, that's why I really like UNC. I think there's a lot of hidden talent here, and there's a lot of hidden potential. Not necessarily hidden per se because of the rankings, but hidden in respect to what we have seen so far. And with that being said, that's 100% why I'm going to nail the over. And for all the same reasons, I agree with you on App State. I can 100% see them losing to App State, but it's entirely dependent on the quarterback play. But I like this team for 8 to 10 wins, and I'm going to take the over.
Nice. Wow. Well, I certainly can't deny that there's a ton of upside with this UNC team. Wouldn't be surprised at all if my under prediction is wrong here. And I personally would really like to see Drake May play. I think that would make this UNC team really fun to watch. And if they end up going to May and this defensive line starts turning the corner and starts playing really well, I think this team has the upside to win the Coastal Division. I think that goes without saying. Now moving down here to Virginia. Virginia, one of these ACC teams in the Coastal that has a brand new head coach. Multiple teams in this division have new head coaches this season. Virginia is sitting at 7 wins as their win total. What's your take on the Cavaliers?
So I teetered back and forth with the Cavaliers, Shoob. I originally had them on the under. Then I kind of analyzed their schedule a little bit, and I thought about it holistically based upon who they play. And we'll get into that as we talk about more of these teams. But a few caveats about Virginia. They're the best of 2 worlds right now. So I'll explain that. They had a 3rd rated offense last year in yardage gained, but they had one of the absolute worst defenses in all of college football. They were ranked in the 100s. They could not stop anything. So it's just that trend that we're seeing with the ACC, Shoob. We're seeing a lot of powerful offensive play, but we're seeing very, very poor defensive play on a consistent basis around the league. And that's why you kind of made that joke a little bit earlier. Like, is this the new age of the Big 12? Because the Big 12 is playing defense nowadays, but the ACC is not playing any defense. So that's something that's really interesting to look at. Another thing that you can't ignore about Virginia is Brennan Armstrong. Dude's a complete stud, threw 4,500 yards last year, and he'll be back. And they bring back their star wide receiver, Dontavion Wicks, who had 1,200 yards and 9 touchdowns. He's going to be an NFL guy. That's another big name. And then they also returned Billy Kemp, who they lost to injury last year, who was also very impactful. Another good wide receiver that they have. So they definitely have some talent there. They will lose tight end Jelani Woods to the NFL draft, who is like one of their X factors on offense. But ultimately, I don't think it's going to drop them too much. I don't think they'll be the 3rd rated offense this year, but they are still a top 15 offense in my mind. Despite all of that. And when you look at that, I've actually found my actual number here. UVA was 121st in yards allowed out of 130 teams. That is atrocious. That is atrocious. They had a terrible defense. Now, they do bring in one key transfer I want to mention for the defensive line. That's Cameron Butler from Miami of Ohio, who is basically a true standout over there. And he may be able to make an impact. But for the most part, when you look at this Virginia team, they have to improve. When I look at 123rd Shoob, I think there's nothing they can do but improve. How could you really get any worse? If you were to get worse than that, that'd be pretty impressive. And when I look at their schedule, I'd see wins: Richmond, Illinois, Old Dominion, Syracuse, Duke. Very favorable. They should start 5-0. I really do think Virginia will start 5-0. They'll be ranked probably top 15 by that point in time. But the proof is in the pudding. Will they keep that up? I don't know that they'll keep it up, but I do have Virginia on the over. And when we look at their maybes, in my estimation, Louisville, Miami, UNC, Pitt, Coastal, Virginia Tech, and I have G Tech in there because I feel like G Tech's got to beat somebody. They're not, because G Tech's got a tough schedule. They're going to beat somebody. But ultimately, I think they're going to win about 3 of those games that I mentioned, and that's going to put them at about 8 wins, which would be the over. And so I'm going to take Virginia on the over, but just barely, assuming that their defense is going to at least modestly improve. And I'm going to stand with the Cavs on this, Shoob.
Interesting. So you got the over 7 wins for Virginia.
I like them for 8.
So if you're a Virginia fan, you're probably not going to want to hear the words that are about to come out of my mouth. They, of course, have a new head coach, Tony Elliott, who was the offensive coordinator at Clemson. He replaces Bronco Mendenhall. But the thing is, Tony Elliott, I think he's got a little bit of a challenge on his hands. They are 108th in all of FBS in returning production. That's usually not a good thing. Their offense was 16th in efficiency last year, which is very good. It was a top 20 offensive in efficiency, and they returned their quarterback, Brennan Armstrong, who was also a very good quarterback. I like Brennan Armstrong a lot. And he also brings back the top 3 receivers from last year in terms of receptions. So that's all very good, right? Not so fast. Virginia loses all 5 of their starting offensive linemen from last season, including Victor Oluwatimi, who was a very, very good interior offensive lineman who went to Michigan in the transfer portal. I think this offensive line that was pretty good last year is going to take a major step back. And even though I love Brennan Armstrong, this is the problem with Brennan Armstrong. If you watch him play, he loves to sit back and he always likes to take his time, and he'll stay in the pocket as long as he can before he fires off the ball at the last second. I think Virginia fans probably agree with me on that. He's going to have a very, very much worse offensive line than what he had last year. And I think that might cause a ton of problems. You also have to factor in there's going to be a new head coach with a new offensive coordinator learning a new system. I think that this offensive line is going to be the downfall of this Virginia offense. Now, I don't want to be too doom and gloom. Again, they do return their top 3 receivers and receptions, and I'm not saying Brennan Armstrong isn't a good quarterback, but I feel like this could spell a ton of trouble. We've seen it happen where very good offenses kind of derail and don't live up to expectations because the offensive line play is just so poor. And I think this is going to be the case with Virginia. Now, as far as defensively, it doesn't really get any better at all. They were 111th in efficiency last year. The defensive line was the 2nd worst in the Power 5, only ahead of Kansas in terms of line yards. And the defensive line might be a little bit better. In fact, the defense as a whole might be a little bit better, but that's not really saying much. It still needs a ton of work. The thing that I think if you want to describe one word to describe Virginia this year, I feel like it could be deceiving. And I feel like this win total is a little deceiving at 7 wins, because the reason why it's up so high is because their schedule was God's gift known to mankind. They got a great draw with their schedule. It is very easy. They're non-con: Richmond, at Illinois, Old Dominion, Coastal Carolina. Now, obviously, those are teams they probably should be, or they'll probably be favored against, but I don't know. Coastal Carolina, at Illinois, I wouldn't be shocked if they drop one of those. I'm just saying, I wouldn't be shocked if they drop one of those. In fact, I think they could.
Are you just saying Illinois because of your dynasty, Shoob?
Hey, well, maybe.
But the dynasty viewers are watching.
I am very bearish on this Virginia team. I really do not think they're going to be as good as their record shows at the end of the year, but I think the schedule is what's going to help them get to a bowl game more likely than not, just because it's so easy. And then you look at their ACC draw, they draw Louisville and Syracuse in the crossover, which is a pretty good draw. You don't have to play Clemson, you don't have to play NC State, you don't have to play Wake. When this opened up as 7.5, I hammered the under with my personal money. And now it's down to 7 wins. It's gone down a half a game. I think 7 wins is the max. I think 7 wins is the ceiling. And for all those reasons I just said, I think it's going to be under. I wouldn't be surprised if Virginia can still maybe get to 6 wins. But like I said, it'll be very deceiving because I don't think this team's going to be very good. But the schedule really is what's bailing them out here and what's giving them a high win total. I wouldn't be surprised if they don't end up going to a bowl game, though. Like I said, it's still very possible. But again, I'm not just trying to dog on Virginia here, but I think with a brand new head coach, I think for all those reasons, it might be a tough first year for Tony Elliott as a first-time head coach. So
You
we'll
know,
see.
Shoob, I do agree with a lot of what you said, especially the offensive line. They've actually lost a lot of guys to the portal too, who were pretty impactful with that offensive line in the last couple of years. But again, like you said, the favorable schedule is why I like them for this over. I really do think they're going to start 5-0, and all they have to do after that is basically hit two to push. And for me, I feel like that's a safe bet. But again, I feel like 6 wins, I feel like they can definitely surpass 6 wins. I think this team, I would be shocked if this team didn't make a bowl game based upon how friendly their schedule is, despite potential offensive line woes. But it'll be interesting to watch. Virginia's one of those teams that can teeter either way. And so, Cavs fans, let us know what you think.
Yeah, absolutely. Let us know what you think. Am I being too harsh on the drop off on what the offensive line will be like? Do you guys think maybe Brendan Armstrong can adapt to the new system and maybe he can adapt his game a little bit more quickly? But based on what I've seen from him, I am not expecting him to have a great season, at least not at all match what he was able to do last year with the drop off in the O lineman ahead of him. So now moving down here to Vaught Tech, the Hokies sitting at 6 wins, their win total on Caesars Sportsbook as of the recording date in the description. You guys can check that out. Maybe some of these lines have moved up and down, maybe by a half game or so since we've recorded this, depending on when you watch this video. But anyhow, Virginia Tech, like their rival in Charlottesville, they have a brand new head coach coming into Blacksburg. Brent Pry, the former defensive coordinator at Penn State, he comes in and takes the helm for this Hokies program. And he brought in some guys through the portal. He brought in 2 new quarterback transfers into battle for that job. Grant Wells, who's from Marshall, and Jason Brown, who came from South Carolina. And right now, those 2 guys are in a bit of a quarterback battle there. Wells is a little bit younger, but he has more playing experience than Jason Brown does. So it'll be very interesting to see which one of these guys wins the battle. The offense overall will be pretty young with a lot of new faces. They got a wide receiver transfer from Temple, Jordan Blue, who I think is a very nice ad. That was a good portal land there by Brent Pry. But then the defense is probably going to be a lot better, and especially with the new head coach that's very defensive minded. I think Brent Pry was a very good defensive coordinator, especially at Penn State. So I think Hokies fans should expect to have a good defense in the near future. The defense returns more than it loses. And of course, like I mentioned, it has the D-minded head coach. Their schedule, you look at their non-con, they open up at Old Dominion, then they play West Virginia at home. West Virginia scheduling a lot of these ACC teams in the non-con. Then they go at Liberty. And if you look at this non-con schedule, and then also you add Wofford in there as well, I think all in all, I think 3-1 is probably a fair, realistic expectation. West Virginia game might be a little bit of a toss-up. We'll see how good West Virginia ends up being. I wouldn't be surprised maybe if if things go very well for them, they could be 4-0 coming out of that, but I would expect maybe 3-1 as a good realistic expectation there. And the thing is, for teams that are very good, it's a bad thing if your tougher teams are away. But if you're a team that's sort of middle of the pack or at the bottom of the conference, it's a good thing that your tougher teams are away, because it means that you play the poorer teams at home and have a better chance to rack up those wins. And that's what you're just trying to do like Virginia Tech, you just want to get to the bowl game at this point in Brent Pry's first season. Their win totals at 6. And I think that if you discount the fact that they have to go at UNC, at Pitt, and at NC State, you look at these home games they have here in conference. They have Miami at home, they got Georgia Tech at home, and then they got Virginia at home, of course, to end the season. So I think all in all, I do like Brent Pry a lot. I think 6 wins is probably about right for this Virginia Tech program. This one, I am not very confident in at all, but I am going to say that if the win totals is at 6 even, I'm going to say that 7 wins is just slightly more likely than 5. I think maybe this defense will give this team a good floor. And of course, they have a handful of very good winnable games there. I'm not very high on this Virginia team, as I just mentioned previously, and they got them at home towards the end of the year, and they always seem to own Virginia in recent memory. I like this Hokie team, just a shade to the over, but again, I think 6 wins is about right.
I got you, Shoob. As far as the quarterback battle is concerned, I really do think Grant Wells is going to be the guy coming out of there. I'm actually higher on him than most people are. His stats didn't really jump off the paper, so a lot of people don't really know about him. But he's a pretty well-rounded quarterback, I think, and I think he has a lot of potential for just being a young guy who came from a smaller program. I think he'll do better at Vodtech, although Vodtech doesn't have a lot of standout wide receivers at the moment, which is something of concern for their offense. So it may take a little bit of an adjustment period, but I think Grant Wells will be the guy that comes out with the job over at Vodtech. They had the 78th rated defense last year as far as yards allowed and 98th rated offense as far as production. So not very good on both sides of the ball. They've been very mediocre. And again, Shub, when you look at the schedule, Old Dominion, Wofford, Duke are the only ones that I'm chalking up as like guaranteed W's. Well, close to a guarantee. Nothing is guaranteed in college football, but close to a guarantee. And then I think they're going to lose to Miami and NC State. I think those are losses. And I think their possibles, are UVA, Liberty, Pitt, UNC, West Virginia, Boston College. And I think they'll win probably about 3 of those games. I think they'll probably end up losing some to some unfortunate circumstances. And if that happens, that puts them at about 6 wins, which is about where I pegged them. But for the sake of the exercise, if you're going to place a bet and you think they're going to get 6 wins and the line's sitting there at 6, I'm not going to bet to push. So I'm taking the under on Virginia Tech.
Gotcha. So we disagree on Virginia Tech just slightly. Again, wouldn't be surprised if either of our bets go the other way. I think that the future of this Virginia Tech program is probably good for the near future with Brent Pry. I like him a lot. He is getting my head coach endorsement here on the podcast. I don't know about you.
He's getting a Shooby snack.
He's getting a Shooby snack.
He's getting a Shooby snack. I do think Virginia Tech will make a bowl game at 6 wins, but again, for the sake of the exercise, it's going to be an under for me.
So now moving down to Duke, yet another team in this division with a brand new head coach, Mike Elko, coming over from A&M, from Aggie land. Their win total sitting at 3.5. What you got for the Blue Devils?
Oh, where do I begin with Duke, Shoob? I don't have a lot of good things to say about Duke.
Me neither.
It's a good basketball school. Fantastic basketball school. Can we talk about basketball, Shoob? I'm sorry, Duke fans. I really don't have anything good to say about your team. There's no hate here. It's just when I analyze the Duke Blue Devils here, oh my goodness, they had 54th ranked offense last year as far as production. But one thing that really, really sticks out about Duke, Shoob, last 130th of 130th in defense last year. The absolute worst defense in all of Division I college football. I mean, so bad that they averaged giving up 518 yards per game, Shoob. 518 yards per game. That is atrocious. Not to mention, when you look at the Blue Devils here, they're not really bringing in any new guys who are going to make a meaningful impact early on. In fact, they lost 2 of their best players to UCLA in the transfer portal. And so it just doesn't seem like things are going to get any better, or at least not immediately. Mike Elko has a lot to do there. Mike Elko's got to bring in some dudes. He's got to recruit. He's got to do whatever the case may be. This season, to me, for Mike Elko, is about just damage control. It's about basically trying to set a culture. I wouldn't expect a great level of success from Duke, but basically you're setting a culture, you're trying to bring new guys in that fit that culture, and you're trying to just control the wildfire from spreading before it completely just engulfs the team, because I really don't think this Duke team is going to win many games. When I look at it, this is one of the few teams, as we've been talking about the schedule, like we say, this team, I think they're going to beat these teams. This is one of those teams where I look at their schedule, I say none of these games are guaranteed wins for Duke. None of these games. In fact, I would go on record saying they're probably going to lose to UVA, UNC, Miami, Boston College, Vatech, Pitt, Wake, Northwestern. That's 8 losses.
Just you don't think North Carolina A&T is a guaranteed win?
I actually don't. That's how low I think of a Duke. The HBCU, North Carolina A&T. So yeah, North Carolina A&T. I think so. When I said they're possibles. Temple, North Carolina A&T, Kansas, and G-Tech. That's how low I think of Duke. Gotcha. And it's not any disrespect. It's a new coach, and it's the fact that they've lost a lot of players in addition to already having the worst defense. And I mean, think about this, Shoob. It can only improve, right? Defensively, they can only improve. They were 130th of 130 in yards allowed. I mean, if you want to try to find a bright spot here, you could say Duke is returning their best receiver in Jalen Calhoun. And so that'll be good for their new starting quarterback, Riley Leonard. But ultimately, Duke just doesn't have a lot going on for them. And it's just, if you're a Duke fan, you're just waiting for basketball season at this point, And one more thing that I really want to point out about Duke, I'm really looking forward to that Week 4 Goliath matchup between Duke and Kansas. That's going to be the battle of the Titans, baby. And I can't wait for that one. That is going to be primetime football. Drop your popcorn for the other games. Come to this one. It's going to be the battle of the century.
But with that being said, it's safe to say you're going to bet under.
Yes. With that being said, I am going under for the Blue Devils.
Well, I think you're very right about Mike Elko and damage control for this year. He's inheriting a very tough roster situation, and that's putting it lightly. I think year 0 is a very good term to describe what Mike Elko is going to be inheriting at Duke. So I don't think Duke fans should really expect much for the football team this year, but you always got basketball season to look forward to in November. So it shouldn't be that painful to go through the first couple months here, football season. The Duke Blue Devils only returned 9 starters off of last year's team, which is one of the fewest returning number of starters in Power 5. They are 121st in all of FBS in returning production altogether, and they went 3-9 last year. Their win total sitting at 3.5. Their quarterback, Gunnar Holmberg, he left for FIU. So like you mentioned with Riley Leonard, he's going to be a new guy coming in there at quarterback. And if you just look at efficiency, at least in terms of this statistic, their offense was 123rd in offensive efficiency last year. And then they were 114th in defensive efficiency, schedule adjusted last year, which is not very good at all. Those are, of course, bottom of the pack in all of FBS on both sides of the ball. And then if you just look at their schedule, like you mentioned, they got Temple to open up at home. I think that's a 50-50 toss-up game, like a truly 50-50 toss-up game. They might be able to win that one. And honestly, they got to go at Northwestern and at Kansas. I don't think they're winning those games.
I don't think so either, Shoob.
Unless they get very good turnover luck, I don't think they're going to win those games. I think Kansas and Northwestern are both going to be improved. And then if you just look at the rest of their schedule, I mean, I'm going to assume, I think we can at least assume they should be able to beat North Carolina A&T. So I think you got one game that they more likely than not should win, though we can't just guarantee it. And then one game in Temple that's probably a toss-up. That's 1.5 wins right there. They might be able to, let's say things go right for them and they pick off a huge upset. Maybe they do beat a Northwestern or Kansas and they get to 2 wins. Maybe they somehow win an FCS or win one of those ACC games somehow and they get to 3. That's still under the win total here. Yeah. I could not believe this thing was at 3.5 when I saw it. And I absolutely hammered this under right here at 3.5. I can't believe it's still up there, if I'm going to be honest. Like I said, Duke fans, just get ready for basketball season. That's all we got to say. Now, last but not least, Georgia Tech, the Yellow Jackets. Georgia Tech, they're not bringing in a new head coach, but they might be bringing in a new one next year because Jeff Collins is on the hot seat. And man, does he not have a very good schedule to work with this year.
He's
I
gone,
mean,
Shoob.
I feel bad for him. I feel bad for him. I
The
feel
man's
bad for
gone. He's
him.
done. He's
Yeah,
finished.
we
They
don't
have
want to
oh my God, Shoob, their schedule's so brutal.
call heads here on the Xan Shoob podcast, but I don't think Jeff Collins is in for a good season at Georgia Tech. But this is one of those instances where we were actually wrong on an outlook for its program under a head coach, because back in 2020, we were pretty right about some of the hires at that point. You were very high on Dave Aranda at Baylor when he was flying under the radar. I was very high on Sam Pittman at Arkansas, but we both agreed that we thought Jeff Collins was a good hire for Georgia Tech, and that has just not panned out. So we were wrong about that one. But I think Jeff Collins just dealt a brutal hand right here with the schedule. They're only 118th in returning production. They lose two of their better players in the portal. Jahmyr Gibbs to Alabama is the big one. And then they also lost their edge, Jared Ivey, to Ole Miss, who was also a very solid player in the portal that they lost. I think one good news, if you want to look at good things about this Georgia Tech team, I think that their junior quarterback, Jeff Sims, he's going to be coming into his third year as the starter. He's got some experience now. If you look at the difference between his freshman year and his sophomore year, he actually showed a lot of good progress, at least statistically, from his freshman year to sophomore year. So maybe with Jeff Sims, he was a 4-star recruit. Maybe he can take a little bit of another leap and produce a lot better than he did last year going into this year. But of course, it's going to be a lot worse of a team around him this season. So that'll be tough. And then the schedule is just a nightmare. I mean, we're talking about Jeff Collins possibly getting fired at the end of this year. Whoever made this schedule is the one that should be fired, in my opinion. They open up at Clemson to open the season. Then they got Ole Miss in the non-con. Then they got to go at UCF, at Pitt. Duke at home, actually, I think should be a win. I think they're better than Duke. So they got that
Duke and
one
West
in the
Carolina.
bag. They get UVA at home coming off a bye week, which I'm not very high on this UVA team. I think that Georgia Tech might be able to, if they're going to upset somebody, I think they might be right there. Then they got to go at FSU, at Virginia Tech. Then they drew Miami in the crossover. Then they finish at North Carolina and at Georgia. I mean, good gravy. Like 3.5. I don't know, man. I think 3 wins is a ceiling, but their record might not be reflective. It might be a better team than what their record shows, but I mean, goodness, I'm sorry, Jeff Collins. Good luck this year. I'm going under.
I mean, for all the reasons you said, Shoob, and this is why I said, like, it's not even a knock on their head coach. He's gone. There's just no way, unless some kind of miracle 30 for 30 ESPN type season happens. There is just absolutely no way that they get this over with that schedule. I don't see it. I don't know how it's going to be possible. I mean, their schedule is absolutely crazy, as you mentioned. I mean, Clemson, Georgia, Miami, UNC, Ole Miss. Who put this together, like you said?
The thing is, if you're their athletic director, you already play Georgia every year as your annual, rival in a different conference. So you think, okay, maybe we'll go light on the rest of the non-conference games, but no, you schedule Ole Miss and UCF.
It's insane. It's like the athletic director must not have a good relationship with the head coach, because he's completely set this man up to fail. Granted, I know these games are scheduled years in advance, but regardless, the athletic director probably should be fired because he's bitten off way more than he can chew. And ultimately, if you're going to keep scheduling like that when your team's already in a state of like limbo and decline, you're not going to rise up from the ashes because no one's going to want to play for you if you can't win games. It's just the nature of the sport. But let's go to the positives. Other than Sims, there are some positives that you can look forward to as a Georgia Tech fan. It's not all negative, unlike how I feel about Duke. They do have a good backup running back who showed some promise last year, who is looking to take that step this year. I think he could actually be a 1,000-yard rusher this year, and his name's Dante Smith. I think he's in for a potentially big year, and I think he could be a 1,000-yard rusher. He's a young guy. I believe it's his sophomore season, his true sophomore season. So he's got a lot of time to develop in that system over there with Georgia Tech. And then one more person that he'll probably be sharing running back carries with is a very, very key transfer from Buffalo, and Dylan McDuffie, who was a 1,000-yard rusher with 11 touchdowns last year as well. So they have some solid guys at the running back position. Their and they have a mobile quarterback, they're probably going to be running, running, and running. And especially Sims, he's going to be running for his life against all those teams he's playing, Clemson, Georgia. It's going to be a tough one, Shoob. And if you're a Georgia Tech fan, I bet this is a topic of discussion for you. You probably talk to your friends all the time about, like, why is our schedule like this? Why does our schedule look like this? Like, there's just zero chance of us beating team XYZ. And we know who X, Y, and Z are. We don't have to reiterate their names anymore. Sheesh, we can add more letters to the alphabet to that one. But it's just brutal, Shoob. It's a tough draw for Georgia Tech, and their AD did them no favors. And as much as I think Georgia Tech is a better team than Duke, I can very well see them getting less wins than Duke based upon their schedule, or if not, at least matching Duke. And so for that reason, I'm also on the under with Georgia Tech.
I think it's a little bit deceiving looking at the win total lines here because Duke and Georgia Tech are both at 3.5, but I think we both agree Georgia Tech is a notch above Duke, but maybe their records are different at the end of the year. I think Georgia Tech is very similar to Syracuse in that people probably won't pay attention to them because they're going to get beat a lot by very good teams this year, but they might be a little bit better than what their record shows. I think that'll also be the same for Syracuse as well.
Yeah,
and again,
definitely
I think
Syracuse.
if you look at Georgia Tech and Syracuse, they're both better than Duke. They're not the worst teams in the ACC, even though they're at the bottom of this graphic, respectively. But with that being said, that'll do it for our ACC win totals. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like. And if you haven't gone and checked out the Atlantic Division, go ahead and check that one out. You guys are going to like to hear our analysis on these teams. The ACC is going to be a very interesting conference this year. Maybe if Clemson has another down year, we might see a team like NC State, or maybe Pitt can repeat. Maybe Miami makes that jump with Cristobal, even UNC. They're a team that has the upside to win this conference. It'll be a good one to follow. And then a lot of teams at the middle and the bottom, a lot of coaches that'll either be in their first year or coaches that are on the hot seat. So it'll be a very interesting conference to follow top to bottom. And once again, thank you guys for watching. Please leave a comment if you're an ACC fan. We'd like to hear what you have to say. And without further ado, we're going to move on here.